No, the title is neither exaggeration nor clickbait. Kingdom Hearts is directly responsible for Final Fantasy's decline. Let me explain. In 2002, Squaresoft, as it was called before becoming Square Enix, the company that owns these video games, was at the peak of its popularity. It seemed physically incapable of not releasing masterpieces one after another. After multiple Final Fantasies, Chrono Trigger or Parasite Eve, when the PlayStation 2 arrived, they released Final Fantasy X, considered one of the best Final Fantasies and one of the best turn-based RPGs ever created. So when Kingdom Hearts was first conceived as something inspired by Final Fantasy but with its own essence, they decided to make it a real-time RPG. Talking about genres is somewhat confusing because some would call Kingdom Hearts, especially as the saga continued, an action RPG or a hack and slash or a character action game, but at the time it was called a real-time RPG because that's how it looked. In Final Fantasy, the character moved when you chose a command, the enemy waited for its turn, but in Kingdom Hearts, everything happens in real time, hence the term real-time RPG that has been lost. Between Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts, Squaresoft was the king of RPGs, both turn-based and action. But it was also the king of something else, something that if you were already gamers back in the day, you'll remember. Squaresoft was the king of FMVs. Those initials stand for full motion video. On the PlayStation 2 and especially 1, the graphics were not what we are used to. Remember how Final Fantasy VII and its very simple character models looked. So when certain important moments occurred, they resorted to FMVs, videos embedded within the game for when the story needed a strong visual component. Final Fantasy VII already has a couple of famous FMVs, like seeing Sephiroth in the flames of the village he just exterminated, but it wasn't until Final Fantasy VIII that they really started to experiment with the limits of this technology. Final Fantasy VIII's FMVs not only look 100 times better, but it was also the first game in the series to use motion capture. Again, something we are now used to. That's why some scenes, particularly the one with Squall and Rinoa's dance, became famous. Nothing of this quality had ever been seen before. Going back to 2002, Final Fantasy X and Kingdom Hearts also had impressive FMVs, now called CGIs, that can compete with modern games. Since Tetsuya Nomura, the director of Kingdom Hearts, is a very funny guy, he had a brilliant idea. Each game would have a secret ending that would show you a tiny piece of the story of an upcoming game. At the end of Kingdom Hearts 1, you saw another side, another story. A sequence where you saw a blonde boy with 2 keyblades, a possibly older Riku, and new Heartless in a mysterious city. Nomura and Squaresoft were confident that Kingdom Hearts would work, but they didn't expect how much. It was an absolute success, so much so that before the year ended, in Japan, they released Kingdom Hearts Final Mix, an enhanced version with extra content. One of those extras was that, under certain circumstances, the secret ending was extended, now called Deep Dive. The ending is much longer and more mysterious, but the key is that it now had a lot of action. The blonde boy with 2 keyblades takes out the Heartless army before climbing the building and throwing one of the keyblades to the guy who might be Riku. And this sequence is the center of Final Fantasy's downfall. Why? This is where the fun begins. Although I've spoken very highly of the FMVs, they didn't usually contain much action. Of course, the action is playable, it's something the player should experience, not watch. Moreover, it's even more difficult to pull off. I think the only fight we see in Square's FMVs before this one was Squall vs Cypher in Final Fantasy VIII's intro. Fans loved the action and aesthetics of Deep Dive. Squaresoft was left with the idea of continuing down this path of cinematic action, but the technology wasn't there to make a full movie out of it. Well, maybe it was, but it was being used to commit another big mistake. In 2001, Squaresoft released Final Fantasy Spirits Within, a movie so bad that it almost ruined the company. It's the example I always give when someone says that X is too big to fail. No, I'm not referring to Twitter when I say X, I'm referring to the variable X. It's a figure of speech that Elon Musk has ruined for me, thanks. Spirits Within is what happens when you don't understand why something is successful. The idea behind the movie is what you might imagine. Since our Final Fantasy FMVs are so good, why not make an entire Final Fantasy movie? And no one disputes that it looks great, but Final Fantasy's FMVs were used to enhance the story. They weren't the core of the work. Spirits Within has a bad story with forgettable characters. It's Final Fantasy only in name, with none of its setting or aesthetics. And the icing on the cake, 25 years ago, companies were no less greedy than they are now. Squaresoft was so convinced that Spirits Within was going to be the shit and revolutionize cinema as we know it that they tried to create the virtual actress. They believed that other companies would pay them to borrow the 3D model of the main character, Aki, and use it to promote their 3D movies just as real actors are sometimes hired to promote real movies. If you want to know more about this topic, look for other videos that are better informed than mine, because although this is important and I had to mention it, it is not the main topic of this video. Yes, Square messed up so much that I have to explain one mistake to explain another mistake. Since they apparently spent all the company's money believing they would recover it, they had to merge with the company Enix, thus creating the Square Enix we all know. This, without a doubt, created a kind of need for redemption in Square. Fans still wanted a beautiful Final Fantasy movie even more than before, because the hard part, the technology, was there. It was the rest, the easy part, that failed. So they had another idea. Since Deep Dive was so beloved by fans, why not draw inspiration from it to create another movie? Yes, Deep Dive is the origin of Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. Tetsuya Nomura, Kingdom Hearts' director, was also the director of this movie. In certain interviews and in reunion files, a book that discusses the development of Advent Children, Nomura says that it was created because Deep Dive made them realize there was a high demand for epic computer-generated action sequences. Of course, it can be deduced that Final Fantasy VII was used for several reasons. Not only because it's the most famous game in the saga and made it popular in the West, but also because it's the only Final Fantasy that has an ambiguous ending. So fans will go to see the movie even if just to see what the future holds for their favorite characters. Not to mention that after the strangeness of Spirits Within, using a Final Fantasy game as the basis for the next movie was a way of telling fans that this time they weren't going to mess it up. Once again, although not as much as Spirits Within, the story was heavily criticized. But no one cared, because they were too busy being hyped by the action sequences. After all, they're the reason why this movie was made, and even today they look absolutely incredible. When Sephiroth made it into Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, it directly referenced his fight against Cloud in Advent Children, demonstrating how it has become immortalized in the history of Final Fantasy. And there's the problem. Advent Children has become an immortal presence for Square Enix, a presence that corrupts Final Fantasy and can be seen when examining the games that were released later. Advent Children was released in 2005. At the end of that same year in Japan, Kingdom Hearts 2 was released. Cloud, Tifa, and Yuffie have their Advent Children designs, but the true proof of Advent Children's inspiration was that Kingdom Hearts focused much more on action, especially when you see their reaction commands. However, Advent Children and Kingdom Hearts were sufficiently separate. For the audience, Kingdom Hearts 2 was a continuation of what was promised in Deep Dive, but the loss of exploration on RPG elements was noticed and criticized, so future games started changing things, trying to win over their audience, sometimes with more success, sometimes with less. So even though Kingdom Hearts and Deep Dive were the origin of all of this is where they stopped being relevant to this story, and I will stop talking about them. Returning to Final Fantasy, even before Advent Children, a certain intention to move away from turn-based systems could be noticed. Final Fantasy X-2, one of the first games by Square Enix after its merger, left behind the CTB system of 10 to return to the ATB of the classics. This may seem harmless, that they simply wanted to do something different or offer an experience more inspired by the classics. After all, the job change system also returns in X-2. But considering that 10 is the most turn-based game from Square, it's curious that even its sequel didn't try to expand its system and decided to change it. In the post-Advent Children era, Final Fantasy XII was released, and this could be the subject of another entire video. I appreciate the combat system, but to someone who has never played it, it looks like an incomprehensible jumble. It is still a turn-based game, but disguised as a real-time system. Why? Well, considering that Final Fantasy XI had recently been a successful MMO, it could be said that 12 tried to mix the best of 10 and the best of 11. It makes sense. The license system in 12 seems to try to be an evolution of the sphere grid from 10. It's worse, but hey, it tries! However, I think what they were really trying to do was to escape from turn-based combat. It was no longer the cool thing, it wasn't what the kids wanted anymore, the kids wanted action. Kingdom Hearts was a hit, Devil May Cry was a hit, God of War was a hit, Advent Children was a hit. It was here that Square Enix began to believe that if they made a turn-based game, they would be mocked. Oh, the characters are just standing there waiting for the bad guy to hit them. Who would want to play that? I'm going to play an action game! Those words seem to be at the center of every decision Square Enix made. But there's a contradiction. The turn-based games they now don't want to make because they're not cool anymore are the games that made them successful, famous, and rich. A large part of their fans are their fans because of the turn-based games. So instead of taking a leap and now making action games, they slowly started making games less and less and less turn-based, as if this way the fanbase wouldn't notice. 12 has a turn-based core, but it is designed to feel like a real-time game. Later came 13 with its paradigm system. How you build your party and its formations still is reminiscent of the early Final Fantasy games, but now there is undeniably a real-time element that wasn't there before. You have to switch to defensive paradigms to block enemy attacks. Summons are quick time events instead of allies like in 10 or 11 or powerful attacks like in the classics. And then came Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII, an action game. Yes, you have to think about how you manage the outfits, which are like the jobs. Yes, you have things like touching an enemy takes you to another scenario, and when you win there's a victory fanfare. All of these are things that turn-based games do, but it's no longer a turn-based game. You are combining attacks and making parries in real time. This is an action game. And if you don't believe me, there's indisputable proof that it was here when Square Enix decided to get rid of turn-based combat. Devil May Cry 1, the father of hack and slash games, introduced the Devil Trigger, a mechanic so excellent and so appropriate for the rhythm and essence of a hack and slash that almost all the great hack and slash games have it. Kingdom Hearts 2 has the Drive Forms, God of War has the Rage, and Lightning Returns has the Chronostasis. But Lightning Returns is not a main Final Fantasy. It might be 13.3, but it's a spin-off, like Dissidia. By the way, the Dissidia battle system is inspired by Advent Children. Everything is connected! It's a spin-off, it doesn't count. Let's see the next Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy 15 is an action game, but a bad one, which I don't understand because they clearly know how to make action games. The Kingdom Hearts are good. The Final Fantasy VII remakes exist. Magic sucks. The danger system is a good idea to link the protagonist's camaraderie to the gameplay, but it sucks. Look, holding square makes you dodge everything, and when you activate the armature, which is a devil trigger, you just have to hold circle. And anyone would think that after the criticism this game received and the successes like Persona 5 or Bravely Default, which is a Final Fantasy in everything but name and also from Square Enix, anyone would think that the next Final Fantasy would at least return a little bit to turn-based combat. Well, Final Fantasy XVI is a hack and slash. We're already at the end of the road on the other end. You literally can't get more action than 16. And while it has a much better system than 15, it is also full of flaws. At least in 15 there were still things like elemental weaknesses. Here you can throw fire at a fire bomb and nothing happens, something that is insulting to the average player. I think it particularly bothers me in Final Fantasy because, as I said at the beginning of the video, in 2002 they had the best of both worlds. Kings of turn-based with Final Fantasy, kings of action with Kingdom Hearts. Why unbalance the scales this way, not just making Final Fantasy an action game, but making it so action-oriented that it barely resembles Final Fantasy? Now I want to talk to you about two games. The two games that, in my opinion, best showcase the incomprehensible decline of Final Fantasy and Square Enix's flawed decisions. The first one is, obviously...
And the game of the year is... Mon ami Clair Obscur, Expédition 33!
Clair Obscur is a Final Fantasy in everything but name. Something I love about the game is how you can clearly see the inspiration from other games, and they carry that inspiration with pride instead of shame. Each character has their own mechanics. Gustav has Overload and Mael has stances, just like in Final Fantasy VI, where Terra has trance or Sabin has martial arts techniques. It's a CTB system like the one in Final Fantasy X, so similar that both games display the turns on a bar on one side. If your group falls, the reserve members take their place, just like in Final Fantasy XII. Monoku's ability to learn and copy enemy techniques was invented by Final Fantasy with its blue mages. There are dozens of things like these, some more from Final Fantasy, others from other games. Clair Obscur has managed to create a masterpiece adored by fans and critics by doing exactly what Square Enix used to do, the same thing they've been refusing to do for 2 decades.
A personal thank you to an important man in my life, Mr. Hironobu Sakaguchi, who made me fall in love with games and inspired me to become a game dev, so thank you, Mr. Sakaguchi.
The other game I want to talk about is Stranger of Paradise, Final Fantasy Origin. I played it recently. In fact, less than a month before making this video. It took me 4 years to play it because I was afraid of it. I suspected that this random spin-off that came out of nowhere would be better than 15 and 16, the main Final Fantasies. Probably not in story, but definitely in gameplay, in combat. I was right. I'm not going to dive into all its mechanics now. Again, there's enough for an entire video, but I want to highlight 2. First, in this game, you can block, like in Souls games. This reduces your stamina bar, but you can also do a special block. Just raising this guard reduces your stamina, so why would you use it? Because if you use it as a parry, blocking at the last moment, not only do you not reduce your stamina, you recover MP and even can unbalance the enemy. And if you perform a special block on a purple technique, Jack will learn it and be able to return it to the enemy. This is a variation of the blue mage. While 16 is simple, to the point of removing elemental weaknesses, Stranger of Paradise figured out how to do parries and a blue mage in an action Final Fantasy. And speaking of 16, do you know what I hate? The stun gauge. Since Final Fantasy XIII, they've been obsessed with it. You fill it up with spells and then proceed to smash your enemy. This is incredibly boring, especially in 16, where stunning means spamming 4 techniques over and over and over again. In Stranger of Paradise, the stun gauge is basically another way to win. You can play more or less normally without taking risks and reducing the enemy's life to 0, or you can use specific techniques, elemental weaknesses, parries, and unique strategies for each enemy to bring their stun to 0 and finish them off with a coup de grace. Instead of being an extra step that makes each battle last twice as long, it presents the player with another way to play. The Tiamat fight you're seeing on screen is the perfect example. In its second phase, it regenerates faster than you can damage it. It seems like an impossible battle, until you realize that injuring its heads reduces its maximum stun. Once you're aware, the battle becomes a test of patience and precision. A great fight that 16 doesn't even come close to in terms of mechanics or satisfaction. And that's just talking about parts of the action. I could talk about how it's a much better RPG, how it has much more variety, why its bosses are better, etc. But as I said before, that deserves a separate video. I have given you many answers in this video. I have shown you the change in Final Fantasy since Kingdom Hearts premiered that fateful secret ending. But now I'm going to give you questions. Why does Square Enix show so much rejection towards the turn-based system that gave them the fame they still enjoy? Why do 15 and 16, their main games, have bad combat systems when they clearly know how to make action games like Kingdom Hearts or Stranger of Paradise? I have many other questions that go beyond the conversation in this video, like why split Final Fantasy VII Remake into 3 parts and turn it into a reimagining, alienating both classic fans who want something more similar to the original and new fans who won't play it because they need to play the classic and Crisis Core to understand what the hell's going on. I'm not saying they're bad, in fact, I'm one of the few who really likes the absurd plot they're creating, but it's a strategy doomed to fail in terms of selling a lot. Because that's the point, isn't it? Sell a lot. Ironically, it seems that their obsession with selling is what leads them to make worse games and therefore sell less. They haven't changed. They're still the same as with Spirits Within. They don't understand what made their games good. They don't understand what made their games sell. They want to sell as much as possible, so they create systems that anyone can play. But nobody wants to. Final Fantasy used to be the peak of gaming, those whom others imitated, but as soon as they got disoriented for a moment, they got desperate and started imitating others. When the creator of Clair Obscur thanked Sakaguchi for making the Final Fantasy games, he wasn't talking about 13, 15, 16 or the remakes, he was talking about 4 to 10. Final Fantasy used to be the greatest example of video game graphics, so they spend millions making visually spectacular things because they don't understand that what made them so beautiful was the emotion driven by the spectacle, not the spectacle itself. They use names and announce games ahead of time to impress investors and shareholders, the same decisions that alienate their workers and fans. I thought that after announcing Kingdom Hearts 3 in 2013 and Final Fantasy VII Remake in 2015, when they were barely made, games that would come out 6 and 5 years later respectively, they had learned the lesson, but instead, they announced Kingdom Hearts 4 3 years ago, and all they've given us since then are some pictures. Dude, it was April 10th, 2022. Soon it will have been 4 fucking years since the announcement. What the hell is going on with that company? Square Enix used to have the best turn-based games, some of the best action games, and even original hybrids, but now they have nothing. Even when they released good games, they come riddled with bugs they never used to have, and they always arrive late. And all of this because Nomura and the team from the first Kingdom Hearts felt like making a video where a kid took down some monsters with 2 giant keys. Jokes aside, that's not the reason for the decline of Final Fantasy. In fact, I might even say that it's not the main reason, but it was the first step on a much darker path. What are you making me choose now? Between the road to turns and the road to action. Neither suits me. I'm taking the middle road. The road to movies and MMOs? No. It's the road to bankruptcy.